So Nashville was not near as good as anyone expected, and I wouldn't say it's terrible, but it definitely wasn't a great race. So I've got a lot of opinions on what happened, so let's go ahead and get into the race because quite a lot of things actually happened. So my thoughts on this race mainly were that it felt like a NASCAR road course race because there was yellows for most of the race, yellows at least every 10 laps, if not more often, and there's just lots of crashes. There's just a pretty sloppy race overall for an IndyCar race, something we don't see very often. Generally, road course races will go with a full course yellow or two, and that's it, but this race had it had a yellow like every 4 or 5 laps, really. So let's go ahead and get into the race. So starting off, you had the green flag, and they made it about a lap or so, a little less than a lap, before Dalton Kellett had stalled his car on the front stretch. Now, the start of the race actually went quite well. I was expecting a crash into turn number 1, taking out a couple of cars or whatever, just because it's a downhill braking zone that's bumpy, and there'd be like 27 cars coming into turn number 1 at full speed. So I expected there would be a giant crash, and there wasn't, which, good on everyone, I guess. But, yeah, that was a bit weird. So on the restart from the Kellett incident, Marcus Ericsson was coming up behind Sebastian Bourdais. Now, Bourdais must have been holding back a little bit, waiting for the leaders to go, but Ericsson likely thought the leaders had already gone and went ahead and gassed it and launched straight over the back of Sebastian Bourdais. Now, this gave Bourdais wing damage rear wing damage that they ended up not being able to fix, and Bourdais had to retire from the race. And Marcus Ericsson, on the other hand, only got front wing damage and somehow didn't get suspension damage, and was able to keep going, and we'll talk about him a little later on, because he was quite a factor later in the race. So moving on, they restarted, and everything was fine up until lap 16, I think it was, where Scott McLaughlin had spun coming into turn 9, that little tight section at the top of the course, like near downtown or whatever. And then that was a pretty harmless crash. He just spun around and had to wait for everyone to get past him, but he was able to keep going. On the restart, there was a big pileup. You had the main candidates here were Simon Pagenaud and Will Power. Now, Power was behind Pagenaud and was looking to try to get up the inside of his teammate on the restart, try to get past him. Now, Power went to the inside, and Pagenaud didn't realize he was there, and just came straight down on him and got spun around. Now, most of the blame here probably falls on Will Power because, well, it was a late move into a tight corner on a restart. That's not really a great thing to do, but it caused a huge logjam because that happening caused a couple of other cars behind him to have to go off and end up running themselves into the wall as well. And some cars spun behind trying to avoid it, and then a couple of other people just had to stop and ended up stalling. So it was quite the weird incident. They had to call a red flag, the first of 2 red flags throughout the race. And they had to get all that stuff cleaned up. So, yeah, that was quite a weird crash, and Penske cars crashing each other, taking each other out. It's not a common thing, and it's not exactly a thing Roger Penske likes. You really don't want to take out your teammate, especially at Penske, and especially when we're talking about Simon Pagenaud possibly being in a contract year. Now, Will Power's already locked in for the next while, so this probably won't help, or this probably won't hurt any chance of getting a contract or anything, but it wasn't great, and it wasn't the only time that Power took his teammate out throughout the race, so we'll get to that later on, but let's keep going on with a little chronological timeline here. So the next thing we're going to talk about here is Jimmie Johnson, who really did not have a good weekend. He crashed 3 total times, and all 3 times he had significant damage that this team had to fix. And actually, he crashed in morning warm-up, which was the second crash of the weekend, and they had to bring out the backup car. But they didn't have a backup car because the first crash they had went to the backup car. So Jimmy was already in his backup car, and they needed a third car. So they went to his teammate Alex Palou and basically ran a Frankenstein car because the outer chassis itself, the bodywork parts or whatever, were Polo's parts, and it had entity data sponsorship on them and everything. And the wings, the rear wing and the front wing, both had Carvana sponsorship with, Jimmy's livery on it or whatever. It was quite a weird thing. Now, Jimmy had gotten in this crash to be his third crash of the weekend. Now, it wasn't exactly his fault, but the team ended up taking the car behind the wall under the red flag and started looking at the stuff and trying to figure out what they would need to fix. Now, apparently they got the gear rack knocked out of place, so that was going to be something that would take a while to repair, and they had taken the engine cover off and started looking at what they would need to repair and getting those parts out. And IndyCar decided that that was too much work under the red flag and disqualified them. So Jimmy got disqualified, and it wasn't the only driver to get disqualified because later in the race, Cody Ware also got disqualified. So quite a weird weekend overall, especially in terms of disqualifications, which you generally don't see a lot. So, yeah, let's go ahead and move on to the restart. So the race restarted without problems and went on till lap 31, where Renus VK basically just stuffed it into the wall at the first chicane. And wasn't too much damage, I think, just probably some front-end damage or whatever for him to fix. But this caused a problem because the leaders were on a strategy where they had not pitted under the last yellow, and the guys in the back had. Now, this made it so that the leaders were going to have to pit and likely lose at least 10 or 15 spots. So they come into the pits, get their service, whatever, come out, and the pace car is basically right there. So Colton Herta, who comes out basically right next to the leader, Marcus Ericsson. So as if it couldn't get any crazier, not only did I don't think anyone expected Marcus Ericsson to be effectively the leader, but I don't think anyone at all expected Herta, who pitted for 4 tires and fuel, to come out of his box and have the leader right next to him. And there were a decent amount of cars that hadn't pitted, and they were decently far up the field. It was the pace car that hadn't gone quick enough through the front stretch, basically from the pit entry to the pit exit, had gone way too slow, because if Herta would have gone even a little bit faster, maybe not even gotten any fuel or just gotten enough fuel that it took the amount of time to put the tires on, he probably would have came out in front of the pace car. Now, this brings into question what the rules are in this circumstance. So what happened is there's a line in the pit lane that basically is the timing line for the pit lane, and basically wherever you are in relation to the field, at that line is where you get put in. So Herta, who had came out of the exit of pit road in first place, basically right next to Marcus Ericsson, had tried to argue that he was the leader, even after pitting, which was a bad argument because if you look back, the timing line was actually quite far back from their actual position, and it was like right before the chicane. At that point, he was 4th. So I don't think IndyCar noticed that because originally they had put him 3rd, and Herta might have cost himself a position, but it didn't matter too much. But just interesting that Herta tried to argue that he was going to gain a position or two and lost the spots. So it was a really weird restart because you had the guys on older tires and the guys on newer tires literally just thrown in together, and some of those guys were faster and some of those guys were upset because they didn't think they were supposed to be where they were in the field, and it was a very chaotic couple of laps. It was all just crazy. But my question really coming out of the whole thing was, if you beat the pace car out, do you get a lap? It doesn't seem like you should, but it brings into question, I mean, you beat the pace car out, that you're in front of the pace car, which means you take another lap around. So if you had come into pit or something and not actually done anything and just drove straight through, could you gain a lap by doing that? Now, this is a pretty rare circumstance, and just betting on running straight through the pit lane and gaining a lap is not a good strategy. So I don't expect anyone to be trying that in the future, but it was a weird thing, and it kind of brought that into question. Is if you beat the pace car to pit road, do you gain a lap? Or do you just get put behind the pace car? I assume in terms of fairness, you should just get put behind the pace car, but it's just a weird situation. Servia, who was driving the pace car, Oriol Servia, should have been driving faster. Just wasn't. It was really weird. So, yeah, let's go ahead and get back onto the restart. So after the restart, there was a little bit of an incident between two more Penske cars. Scott McLaughlin, who had a position, was going down into the corner at the exit of the second bridge straightaway. So he was going into that corner. That's quite a fast corner, especially with the bumps and whatever. It's the first corner on the first lap. So that corner's quite a tricky corner, and Will Power decides he's going to try to dive it up the inside. And again, it's quite a late move, too late of a move to actually yield anything. And McLaughlin, rightfully so, doesn't realize he's there, doesn't think he's going to be there, and just takes the corner like he normally would, and gets taken out by his teammate Will Power. Now, this time I put much more blame on Power because it was a much more risky move at much higher speeds. It was obvious that he wasn't going to pass McLaughlin, but McLaughlin ended up getting turned around for his second spin of the day, this time actually getting damage and getting hit by Dalton Kellett. Eventually, they both ended up having to retire from the race. It was both of them, actually, McLaughlin and Kellett's second yellow flag for them of the day, both separate incidents. The first time and then the second time, it was just them. Neither of them, it was really their fault. I guess Kellett tried to go for a gap that wasn't exactly there when trying to get past him because McLaughlin was like this and he was just too close to the wall, but Kellett thought there was enough of a gap and just went straight through and crashed. That brought the field back together, and yeah. So now we skip ahead to lap 55, where Cody Ware just kind of spins lazily coming out of the stadium section, and he tapped the wall, but it didn't look like it got him any damage. Might have just bent his rear or front wing a little bit, but it wasn't bad. He ended up going to the back of the field. He was running 7th at the time, so really kind of it was a costly spin in terms of 52 car standards, but wasn't really anything major other than the fact that yellow ended up coming out, which made it so that basically there's going to be a 20 or so lap run to the finish because the race was 80 laps and they were going to restart about lap 60. And Colton Herta, who was in 5th at the time behind Ericsson, Dixon, and his two teammates Hunter Ray and Hinchcliffe, had to try to run to the front. Now, by the time there was about 10 laps to go, Herta was in P2 past Scott Dixon and trying to get past Marcus Ericsson. Now, he had been very close to him and even thought about sending it up the inside at one point, but thought better of the move and ended up also kind of locking up and almost hitting a wall. So with 6 laps to go, Colton Herta tries to go through that final corner at the entry to the stadium. I guess I'll call it the stadium section, the stadium parking lot section, that turn 9. The same place where McLaughlin and Kellett crashed. So Herta ends up going in way too deep, missing the apex entirely, locking up, and hitting the wall. From P2, this had a big impact on Herta in the championship. He'd pretty much be dead even with Newgarden now, if I counted the points right, if he hadn't crashed there. But he ended up crashing, and there was not significant, but there was damage to the course. I think the concrete barrier was moved back a little bit, and then the tire barriers were they had the covers ripped off of them or whatever, and they ended up having to bring out a red flag to fix the track. Now, this left them with a restart with 2 laps to go, with Marcus Ericsson still leading. Somehow, Ericsson had been able to maintain that car throughout the entire race, and he'd actually been pulling away from Herta on the straightaways when he was still battling him, which was quite interesting. They must have been running significantly less downforce. So anyways, with Herta gone, the running order was Ericsson, Dixon, Hinchcliffe, Hunter Ray, and that ended up being how the race finished after the 2-lap restart. There really wasn't much that happened. Basically, it was quite an interesting podium with, of course, Ericsson and Hinchcliffe up there, which I don't think many of us expected at the beginning of the race or mid-race or really at any point until the end. But basically, moral of the story, Ericsson had good strategy calls at the beginning of the race, and even with the crash on lap 4, was able to win the race, which was quite crazy in my opinion. So the main things I want to talk about with the race, just the way it ran overall. They need to move the restart zone to the the start-finish straight, or the starting line straight. They need that to be the start-finish straight, or at least the start and restart straight. There's no reason that they should be like starting in the middle of a tight section where there's not any room to pass, and it was just an invitation for incidents, because I think there were 3 or something crashes on restarts, which is just insane. Saying as they got through that first corner cleanly on lap 1, it doesn't seem like they should be crashing there 3 times on a restart. So hopefully next year that ends up getting moved over there. I'm fine with the pit lane where it is. Well, I guess the pit lane being where it is probably the best place that they could put it, because, I mean, there's a lack of space because it's a street course. The problem is that they tried to put the start-finish line even with the pit straight, and that's just not going to work. It just doesn't work. They need to have the race restart by or at the start-finish straight, or I keep saying start-finish, at the start line where it normally is, and then maybe even have the finish line in that stadium section where the pit lane is or whatever. It's just a weird thing, because it caused so many crashes that really could have easily been avoided, and that just needs to be moved for next year. And the pit lane, to avoid a situation like the thing that had happened with Ericsson and Herta, where Herta had thought he had came out of the pits in first still somehow, they need to either make the pit speed slower, or slower under the yellow, or put a chicane at the entry to pit lane or something, or just something to slow it down, because especially with the chicane on the racetrack that in pit lane you just get to skip, it makes it so that it's quite a fast pit lane, and can end up causing stuff like we had seen under yellow, where the pace car almost gets beat out by guys coming out of the pit lane. It just needs to get changed for next year, that, or just have the pace car drive faster, because, I mean, it was quite a weird pit lane, I guess. So, yeah, let's go ahead and get into talking about the wrap-up stuff. So let's talk about the results. First up, Marcus Ericsson obviously had won the race, and this is his second win on the year, and also his second win of his career. So it's been a pretty good year for Marcus so far. This actually moves him up to 5th in the point standings, behind only Joseph Newgarden, Pato O'Ward, Scott Dixon, and Alex Palou. So overall, obviously great day for Ericsson. I honestly wonder if he can get past Newgarden if Ericsson has a couple of really good races and Newgarden has some bad races. I think, really, though, that's probably more of a result of the 2 wins he's gotten and less of a result of overall performance. I would be surprised if Ericsson ends up getting 5th unless something else weird happens. Maybe he wins another race, like something, I don't know. But if things go how we expect them to go, I don't think Ericsson will end up 5th. He'll probably end up 6th or 7th behind at least Ray Hall in P6. Let's go ahead and talk about second, which is Scott Dixon. This moves him up to 2nd in the championship behind Alex Palou. It's a good points day for him. Obviously, he gains points on Palou. He passes O'Ward in the championship, so good day for Scott Dixon. Third is James Hinchcliffe, which this is a great day for him in terms of contracts, because Hinchcliffe now is much more likely, if I had to guess, to get re-signed for next year, because obviously a third-place finish is the type of thing Andretti's going to want, especially in a race of attrition like this. Good for Hinchcliffe. Fourth is Ryan Hunter-Reay, first driver outside of the points, or outside of the podium. So this also helps Hunter-Reay's cause in terms of possibly getting a seat for next year, though obviously it's probably still quite likely that they're going to, at least one of them is going to have to go somewhere else next year. I'm still leaning towards Hinchcliffe because Hunter-Reay's done a little bit better and has more history with them, but also, Hinchcliffe has 2 main sponsors that he'll have, so that will probably help his cause at least a little bit. So that'll all be stuff we'll talk about later. 5th is Graham Rahal. This obviously helps him in the points. Typical Rahal day, just kind of climbed his way up through the field throughout the race, and by the end he was up in the top 5. So he's in 6th in the points right now. So I've pretty much talked about everything that I think I'm going to talk about. this race was not great, but I think it has promise for next year. They need to make adjustments to the track. They need to make some overall adjustments with how the race is run, and I think it will be a great race next year because the track shows a lot of promise. If they, especially, I think if they resurface the track, I think the bumps probably don't help anything in terms of, I mean, I don't know, it's a quite bumpy circuit, bumpier than Detroit, and I think they've already said they're working on resurfacing of some kind there. So hopefully, with a resurfaced track, it'll make the race a little smoother next year. Because this race was a bit of a wreck fest. So hopefully next year will be better. Next race up is the Indy Grand Prix, and I will actually be at the race. So if any of you guys are planning to go, I might see you there. I think we're going to end up doing just general admission tickets, so we'll probably be in, I don't know if they're doing, like, general admission in the grandstands, or if they're actually putting those back on, like, the mounds or whatever, where they used to be. I think it depends, probably just whatever they've decided with COVID stuff. I'll find that out. But, yeah, that's about all I've got for this video. I'll see you guys at Indy next week for the Grand Prix. So I'll have a video out for practice on Friday, and then the race on Saturday, and probably, maybe, some type of vlog thing or crowd reaction or whatever. So that's about all I've got for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you all then. Bye.